Good morning, everyone. It's good to see you all on this third Sunday in the season of Lent as we continue making our way through Adam Hamilton's book, Unafraid. For just one more week after this week, we wrap up the series next week, and then we're on our way to Confirmation Sunday on the 17th, and then, believe it or not, Holy Week begins. So here we are, 3 months into the new year, and reflecting on apocalypse, change, fear of missing out, and finances. Just like I said a couple of weeks ago, we are not covering all of those in one sermon. We'll touch on bits and pieces of them, but I do encourage you to read the section, the chapters that are related to those topics. I remember when I was a kid, my mom had a decorative pillow, one of a few in the house, and it lived on a rocking chair beside the hearth fireplace in our family room. And it was embroidered or cross-stitched or something. And it read, "Why worry when you can pray?" That was the phrase. Why worry when you can pray? I think it was a visual cue for my mother to remember when raising the three of us and raising my dad, life became overwhelming, and she needed just a little subtle reminder. Why worry when you can pray? Seemed reasonable. Why waste time and energy worrying and fretting about life when we can turn to the source and strength of our lives in prayer? And yet, I also know at times, depending upon the change that we might be facing, the financial concern that has found its way to our doorstep, or the perceived apocalyptic upheaval facing our world, praying instead of worrying is easier said than done. Some of us worry about all manner of things, much of which never comes to pass, and a lot of which is not worthy of our time or our mental energy. And sometimes life gives us things that are truly worrisome, frightening. At times, life can be overwhelming, and we can be consumed by fear and anxiety and worry over change or finances or missing out on things that are important and significant, or being concerned that the whole world is coming apart. On Easter a few years ago, I got a phone call from a colleague who told me that his nephew had taken his own life at 21. And he asked me if I would do the funeral, and I did. Seth was like a nephew. He had grown up around our kids. I had known him since he was just a little guy. That was a devastating change, to say the least. A legitimate reason to worry, to be overwhelmed, to be afraid. I know his mom struggled with her own grief and trying to manage the grief of his two brothers, and I'm sure it felt like a loss that was apocalyptic in nature. Changed their world in ways they never imagined and certainly didn't ask for. And pious words embroidered on a pillow about praying instead of worrying seemed empty. I mean, how do you pray in a moment like that? Maybe you've been there, maybe you've been worried or anxious or afraid because life has become tragically overwhelming, unexpectedly. We probably all have had moments like that when the weightiness of life has just consumed us with worry, concern, anxiety, fear. And we can have times when worry and anxiety and fear come to us for more positive reasons. Not all worry is grounded in fear or uncertainty about some tragedy or horrible incident in life. Sometimes it can come from positive things. I remember when our oldest was going away to college, the first one that we kicked out of the nest, and I had to send her to Chapel Hill, which made it even worse. Her mother was thrilled. I was in mourning for months. I never did physically write them a check with my signature. I did all that through the bank, so I can say that I never technically wrote them a check. That's a whole other story. But, this is positive change. Our younger daughter, Abby, she's 15 months behind her. She was right on her heels out the door. And then there was Eli. So that's excitement. It's positive, and yet it can cause you to worry. You don't know what they're doing when they're away. And you don't see them come in the evenings every night. Has a kind of grief all its own. That's a positive thing, and yet also can overwhelm us. Not to mention, multiple tuitions all at once. Many of you know what that's like. On top of that, in that very same year, when Salem began the year going off to Chapel Hill, Abby would the next summer go off to Furman. We found out we were moving to a new appointment and would have to sell our house and upend our lives and figure out life in a new place, all within about 12 to 15 months. All wonderful things, good things, and yet reason for worry, anxiety, a little fear about the change, about what we might miss out, about the finances not working out. If time allowed, I know we could go around the room this morning, and whether it's a heartbreaking tragedy like my family friend suffered, or positive change like kids going off to school or growing up or moving out of the house and finding their own way, we could all go around the room and tell those stories of the ways in which life at times can be positively or negatively overwhelming, and it's worrisome. It's a heavy burden to carry at times. It's also normal. It's normal, as Hamilton notes. The problem is when the worry or the anxiety or the fear take hold of us and control us, leaving us paralyzed or stuck. And maybe you or someone you know has been there. So knowing this, and as a remedy to paralyzing worry about change, about finances, about missing out on things, about the upheaval of the world around us, Jesus says, pursue God's kingdom. Don't worry, pursue God. Look at the grass, look at the lilies, look at the birds. They're not worried, and God provides for them. How much more does God love you and care for you? It's not that Jesus is dismissing the things that cause us to worry. It's rather he's saying that there is a pathway not around life, but through life with him as our friend and guide. And he invites us to pursue that path. Many of you have been there when things have piled up, when there are decisions to be made, when just by the passage of time, life changes. When you're young and you're moving out on your own and you're trying to figure out, what do I do with this life that I've been given? When you're new parents, I remember distinctly the day that we brought Salem home from the hospital. The nurse rolled Kim out of the hospital and Salem right behind her. And we buckled her up in her car seat once we figured out how to do that. And then the nurse walks back down the hall, and we turn and look at each other over the roof of the car as if to say, what in God's name are they thinking? They're letting us take this home with us. We have no idea what to do with it. There's no manual, there's no test, there's no license you have to obtain. You just bring a human home with you. And you figure it out. That's, you might get a little worried. I remember that distinctly. Or some of you perhaps are in those moments when you're no longer caring for children or younger folks in your life, but now you're caring for older folks in your life. You're parenting parents and trying to help them navigate their latter years. Like the building of wind and waves of a storm, life can overwhelm us. Loved ones grow older. Children do what we hope they'll do. They move on and move out. Family members and friends experience relationship changes, health changes, job changes. Relationships hit a rough patch. You have that week when the dryer, the disposal, and the car all stop working all at once. Life can overwhelm us. There are reasons to worry. It's normal, but not for it to paralyze us or to keep us stuck. We've probably all been there. When life feels more like, why pray when you can worry? And in those seasons, Christ invites us to pursue God's kingdom, to return to the center, the ground and being of our lives. It's the reason we come together here in this place. It's the reason we preach and teach and worship, and the reason we dare to speak hope into the midst of life at times when hope seems the last thing we should dare to speak. It's that Easter, friends, which is coming, is true. Ours is a God of life, and everything, as Tolkien said, that is sad will one day become untrue. Jesus says, when life is overwhelming you, when the worry comes, when the anxiety consumes you, redirect your attention, your heart, your life to that truth. To the truth of God's sustaining, never-ending love for us. Not to get around the difficulties of life, but to walk through them with hope and courage and strength and grace. Take hold of the life that really is life, Paul says. Let go of the life that's consuming you. And take hold of the gift of life that God longs to give. Or as Jesus put it, lose your life in order to find your life. Your real life, your true life, that's rooted and grounded in Him. What we shouldn't do is what Peter Scazzero refers to as secondhand spirituality. And I love that phrase. Scazzero is a pastor. We've talked about him a little bit before. Writer. His work on emotionally healthy spirituality I highly recommend it. I've shared a little bit about him before. You may recall he's the pastor who's leading a successful church. By all the outward appearances, had a successful ministry. And his wife came to him one day and said, if you don't change some things, I'm going to go to a new church. Yeah, that's how bad it had gotten. Life was overwhelming Peter. And there was a lot of worry and anxiety in that home. And he says what we have to avoid in those moments is secondhand spirituality. In other words, living off of someone else's relationship with God without having a relationship with God on our own. Because it's easier, he says at times, to live off the life that someone else has with God rather than pursue and cultivate one on our own, rather than to have our own direct experience of Christ's love for us, rather than doing what Jesus says, pursue the kingdom. In other words, it's easier to go through the motions of faith than to sometimes have faith. And when we merely go through the motions, we find ourselves not being overwhelmed by God's love and care for us, but overwhelmed by life. And life feels more like a burden and a curse than a blessing and a gift. The remedy, Jesus says, the remedy, Peter Scazzero says, is not secondhand spirituality, living off someone else's relationship with God, but rather pursuing one on your own, for yourself. Knowing Christ, loving Christ, giving Christ more and more of your heart. Relying on God's strength and not our own. And one more bit about that. And this is a counter to the world's increasingly isolated and divided reality. We do this together, in community, so that when my worry, my anxiety, my fear becomes too much to bear, and when my faith grows dim, yours can sustain me, and yours can sustain each other. We do this pursuing of God and God's love for us together. Not believing that it'll make life always easier or rosy or perfect, but trusting that pursuing God and God's kingdom is the pathway through all that seeks to overwhelm us and cause us anxiety and fear. In a few moments, we're going to come to the table and receive again the gifts of Christ's presence with us. These simple gifts, bread, cup, they're, as Wesley referred to them, a channel, a means of God's sustaining love and grace and strength for us. And they're a tangible reminder, friends, that in the midst of life, even when life is overwhelming, even when it feels more like I'd rather worry than pray, we can grab hold of Jesus with all our might and trust that He is already, whether we know it or not, taken hold of us. And the best news of all is, today and all days, is Christ never ever lets go. Amen.